Hot mic? You got a hot mic? Excellent. Okay, going to call the session to order. We're extremely pleased to have another one of our keynote speakers here. Dr. Alex Dehgan is the CEO and co-founder of Conservation X Labs, which harness innovation and frontier technologies to prevent, mass extinction stuff. Really important global One Health perspective. He previously served as the chief scientist of USAID with rank of assistant administrator and created the agency's DARPA for Development, DARPA for Development, I should say. I could go on talking about the numerous accolades that Alex has had in his career. He was a founding county director of the Wildlife Conservation Society's Afghanistan program, helped create Afghanistan's first national park, amongst many other accolades. He's an author of The Snow Leopard Project and winner of the Gold 2020 Nautilus Book Prize. Please welcome me welcome to Alex to the podium for his talk today. Thanks.
Thanks a lot for inviting me, and this is I've always wanted to come to Cornell, and this is a real pleasure to be here, particularly just given things like the ornithology lab and the veterinary sciences that happen here are the best in the world, so it's super exciting to be here. I'm going to lay a foundation for why we are using AI and other technologies into conservation, and then get into the actual model. So I think the first thing is, even though I'm an extinction scientist, by training I'm an evolutionary biologist, mammologist, biogeographer, number of different angles in terms of working on things. Also studied epidemiology at Johns Hopkins for the fun of it, because I love it, and I love thinking about disease. But one of the biggest challenges I've had is I've set up national parks around the world, such as the first national park in Afghanistan with the Wildlife Conservation Society. Conservation has done this for the last 60 years or more, right? We've set up national parks, but if we look at every major group of species that we have studied well, we see that they are in the state of decline, right? Moving along a path to extinction. If we look at species that we don't pay as much attention to, so we think about invertebrates in particular, we are so data deficient with where they are, but we believe that they are already over that precipice of into the mass extinction events. So we need to fundamentally change how we think about conservation and how conservation works. This is my wife, who worked with me at the Wildlife Conservation Society. We're in China. This is a mall devoted to wildlife trafficking, wildlife products. This is a single store. Those big bags are shark fins. Up at the top, there's probably 30 fins in each of those bags. The giant bags with the little fins have probably hundreds of shark fins in them. There are whale shark fins in the store. There was probably about 100 plus stores like this, right? So our demand for food, feed, fiber, materials around the world. In the United States, by the way, is one of the biggest sources of and demand sources for wildlife trafficking in the world, as well as for the pet trade, but is driving species extinct, right? And conservation was set up by Michael Soule and by others like Norman Myers and Georgina Mace as a crisis-based discipline and a solutions-based discipline. And this has been our purpose, but in fact, it has really been neither. We have spent, and I like to say I'm, as an extinction scientist, probably one of the most worst people you can invite to dinner, because I will just depress whatever dinner party you're in, right? Thinking about it, right? My job is professionally to describe and lament the passing of species and write up the data that I collect into epitaphs that we call scientific papers. And we have to change how we do that, right? And one of the problems is our very way that we approach conservation is pretty depressing. And this is a good friend of Steve Osofsky's and mine, Kent Redford, that told me about you can hire professional mourners in Greece to come to your funeral, which I think is a great idea, right? That will really go through. And these are what we've been doing as conservationists and climate scientists, right? If you don't believe me, take a look at the titles of some of these great books. These are fantastic books, but I'm just focused on the titles. Learning to Die in the Anthropocene, Field Notes from a Catastrophe, The Water Will Come, Scatter, Adapt, Remember, and The Uninhabitable Earth. But the favorite that I have is We're Doomed, Now What? The fact is, what that does is it actually discourages people from taking conservation or climate action. It pushes people away. It makes them think that these problems are unsolvable. It gets them focused on their reality show of the day. And it doesn't allow us to bring in new ideas, new approaches, new disciplines, and new solutions to conservation. And if we keep doing the same thing and expect a different result, it will kill us. Because ultimately, the sixth extinction is about our own, right? What's key is that we need to match the speed and the scale of the problems we face. And I think some of the good news is that solutions exist, that much of humans have created the problems, we have the means to solve them. And this is what my organization, as a brief introduction, was set up. It was set up to be a Bell Labs, a Google X, a Xerox PARC, an institute for creative disruption in conservation, where we both do directed innovation, where we build tech, and we also use prizes, challenges, prototyping competitions to help other people do the same. And to date, we've supported something like 165 new companies with team members from over 70 countries, raised $565 million. We haven't taken a penny of that to be able to build this field of nature tech and solutions for the underlying drivers of extinction. And we focus, and I think conservation really needs to focus on the revolutionary, not the evolutionary. Because if we think about the problem, right, our problems are scaling with population growth and people moving into middle class who want, air conditioning and protein and cars and all the things that we have here. And what that means is increased demand on our planet. So our solutions have tended to be incremental, but our problems are increasing and the demands are increasing exponentially, so we have to meet the speed of that demand. This phrase, by the way, comes from DARPA, which is part of the reason we want to think about it. We also need to make technology available to everyone, everywhere, at any time, and I think this is really key. And for us, conservation technology represents a new hope of how to do that. And just to give a couple of quick examples, we know that in 1979, like the Intel 4004 chip had 2,300 transistors. By 2024, the NVIDIA Blackwell processors have 208 billion. That's an exponential, right? In thinking about how we use that. If you remember, it wasn't that long ago, the first human genome project took 13 years and $2.7 billion, hundreds of scientists to sequence a single genome. And we have a speaker from the University of Guelph, one of the most fantastic places on Earth, but they are using the Promethean in large numbers, which can do 9,200 human genomes per year at the cost of a few dollars for a single genome. That's an exponential increase. And we're seeing the same thing in artificial intelligence, right? And the speed of artificial intelligence and what's capable of doing. I don't think people can predict, because predicting an exponential is extremely hard, because when you first look at things, it looks like a flat line. But we've seen our own fields of, Washington, D.C. now has Waymos now being tested that'll be deployed out. It's already being deployed in San Francisco and L.A., in Phoenix and other places. We're seeing massive changes across other fields. And we should expect the same kind of changes in conservation and, of course, veterinary science. One of those areas that we've seen is monitoring from local scale to planetary scale. Our ability to sense and know anything, anytime, anywhere, because of the fact that we all have a phone in our pocket, which is a sensor. Sensors are now ubiquitous. They're incredibly cheap. We have multiple platforms to do so. We supported, this is one of the greatest places for acoustic AI on the planet here at Cornell, we supported open acoustic tools because we need to be able to tap into that expertise, but democratize the size, the cost, and the accessibility of such tools for all conservationists to be able to use. And AudioMoth is one of those platforms that is cheap enough that they allow you to blanket a forest with such tools, right? But we know that we can look at different levels, from drones that now have LiDAR and hyperspectral imagery to satellite systems. I was lucky enough to help Planet get launched, pun intended, but we also have ubiquitous communications with Starlink and direct-to-cellular now coming online. Direct-to-cellular is different than the existing Starlink service because it goes directly to your phone and IoT devices. So anywhere, at any time, connected, and the ability to monitor species. And of course, due to things like eBird and the sensor in your pocket, your phones, right, we have the ability to understand bird migrations and really where they are moving with unprecedented detail, to the extent that the Nature Conservancy, for instance, in California, was able to identify which weeks and which farmer fields needed to stay fallow longer for the bird migration to be supported, and could just pay the farmers to delay planting by a single week, as opposed to having to purchase and create a protected area. And we know tools like iNaturalist, right, have allowed and unlocked the ability to observe wildlife around the planet more easily, and then integrating AI into that has allowed it to do so. So this question, how do we accelerate and scale protection of wildlife and wildlands, I think is key, and artificial intelligence is a key part of it. And we've heard some of this today, the large language models. What we haven't heard as much about are machine vision, and machine vision through edge models, and I'll talk about what that is in a second, cloud-based systems, acoustics, and what we're able to do with those. And the one thing I'll point out is, why is this actually really necessary for conservation? It's because every year we have a $700 billion gap in the amount of money we need for conservation. So there's two ways we can address it. One is we can say, okay, we need more money for conservation, right? But USAID, the organization that I used to work for and love, is no longer around. It is one of the biggest funders of biodiversity in the world. So to catch this gap, can we use technology to increase our efficiency as conservationists and automate the processes that we're trying to use? And there's a number of different systems that allow us to do so that we've developed, and I'm going to talk about our examples. There are a lot of other great examples, including here at Cornell. Again, I think Cornell and the Ornithology Lab is one of the world's greatest leaders in the acoustic space. So an edge system is just how it sounds. It means that instead of processing the AI in a data center, which a lot of those data centers actually happen to be right next to Dulles Airport, where I spent a lot of time yesterday and flew out from yesterday, and you fly over and it's just a landscape of these data systems, which have a huge impact on energy use and the environment that we know. But what Edge does is it processes the data on a device next to where the data is collected. So when people say on the edge, it means that the processing is happening locally. And that means that what we heard from our colleague from Google Research is those models have to be actually what they call tiny ML, are really, really efficient for the purposes that you're using. And the analysis has to be really tight in terms of what we're doing. So one tool that we developed are for camera traps, and this is our Sentinel device. And most camera traps in the world are pretty similar, right? They use an infrared sensor that detects motion as an animal moves by that sensor, and they take a picture of the animal, or they'll take a video of the animal. The challenge is, and having set up hundreds of these traps around the world, is you're setting them up in remote areas. They're generally not connected to the internet because you're or cell phones. And when you go get them, you set up hundreds of these devices. They're recording on these memory cards, and you have 20, 30, 100,000, a million images to go through, and you're looking for a subset of those images. What we do is, instead of building a new device, we said, how do we make these devices smarter? And so we took, all of these devices have something in common, which is a standardized memory card. So we plug, as we're doing here, into that memory card slot, and there's a second device that's an edge AI device. The AI is processed in that black box right behind the device. These chips, some of these chips are now going for $7 a piece. So the accessibility of this is dramatic. And what we're able to do is detect species, disease, poachers, and actually understand behavior. And then through nanosatellites, other communication systems like LoRa, and something called, and regular cellular, we have the ability to send it back in real time. So you have early detection and rapid response if you're looking at things. So we can start looking and automate. I'm a behavioral scientist, I studied lemurs, but I would have loved to have the ability to actually automate the description and analysis of behaviors of primates, and that we're doing so in the Congo here. And we are now able to do this for up to 50 or more individual animals simultaneously as we are working. But we have also the ability to detect diseases with a phenotypic signature. So think chronic wasting disease or mange are two of the things that we're looking at, but also the ability to look at behaviors. So in this case, these are Florida panthers. The Florida panthers went through a population bottleneck down to 50 individuals, and they now get this neurological disease, I'm sure most of you know, of feline leukoneuropathy. I'm not very good at my diseases. I'm in a room full of veterinarians, so I apologize about that, but they call it FLM for short. The key is we need to remove these individuals from the population before they are at breeding age. And what we can start doing is actually detecting from their gait whether or not, and you can tell the abnormal walking one has the signs of that genetic disease in terms of how it's walking. And we can prevent that individual from breeding and passing on the disease and driving this species to extinction. And we're working with Florida Fish and Wildlife to be able to do that. We also have the ability to now start not only determining is something a jaguar, determining which jaguar it is, understanding demographic change, and determining that behavior. And that kind of information, the former picture from the Peruvian Amazon, this is from Turkmenistan. These are all projects we work on and where we have teams on the ground. Working with the Persian leopards, we discovered that these Persian leopards, because we could identify individuals, were crossing vast distances that people were not expecting. And that changes how we actually do conservation on the ground. And we do this conservation across multiple places around the world. The Sentinel device is incredibly accurate. We are doing deployments. One of the front lines of extinction are islands. If we look at animals that have already gone extinct, it tends to be endemic species on islands, right? They are naive to predators that are usually introduced by humans. And in that case, one of the two sets of biggest predators are rats and cats, unfortunately. And so for rats, we work with the New Zealand government on eradicating rats off of these islands, identifying those rats, and identifying whether those eradication efforts are successful or unsuccessful is critical. Because if we miss a pregnant female, right, that is tens of millions of dollars that has to be spent again to do these eradications. We don't want false positives because we don't want, these islands are remote. You don't want people coming back to these islands and making those types of investments. And we want to be able to find that information as fast as possible. So in this case, we set up camera traps that took 24,000 images. In those images, we had 7 instances of unique rats in those photos. The New Zealand government wasn't quite trusting the AI and decided to do an independent check of each of those by hand, of each of those 24,000 images, right? These processes take them weeks. And what they found was we had 100% accuracy in being able to get that, and that was critical. But in places like the Galapagos, where people aren't strict in terms of the protocols of how they set up the camera traps, we saw lower levels of accuracy. So how we set up these systems are actually important on even with the models are working. The other piece is just being able to pick up all the camera trap images. You get a smaller image when you find a positive. It gets sent via satellites, but sending all the images via satellites is really costly. So we can send out drones. They hover over the devices and pick up all the images and bring it back home, and we've automated that. The second is really thinking about cloud-based systems. And these are, after the data has been collected through a variety of ways, we can start doing this analysis. And the story I want to tell you about is about whale sharks. And there's a project that's now part of Conservation X Labs called WildMe. And whale sharks are really hard to discover. They show up to places, sometimes form large aggregations, like off of the Horn of Africa or Isla Mujeres off the Yucatan Peninsula. And then the whale sharks disappear. And it's really hard to track them. And so we knew when we started this project that there was 300 whale sharks really well known, characterized to science. Hand determining the whale sharks, which ones are which from the pattern of spots on their back, was an incredibly time-consuming and error-prone activity. So we started using an algorithm that was from the Hubble spacecraft that characterizes Hubble photos of the universe and places it where those photos are from automatically, and applied it to the pattern of spots on the back of the whale sharks. And this was a project that was Tanya Berger-Wolf, who's at Ohio State, a machine vision specialist, Jason Holmberg, who now leads WildMe, who is the database engineer at Dell, a NASA scientist and a whale shark specialist from Australia. And they started working together. And we went from 300 to 3,000 known whale sharks that are now being followed around the world every time they are seen by someone. And we start getting better understanding of that species. But the thing they did next that I thought was really amazing was we then started scrubbing every YouTube video for an image of a whale shark that was posted, using natural language processing to scrape the metadata, and then bots to query the poster automatically to fill in the gaps of any data that we needed. And that led us to get to up to now, I think it's around 23,000 whale sharks known to science that are being followed every day of the year that someone uploads one of those pictures of a whale shark. That allowed us to take the number of whale shark hotspots known in the world from 13 to 20. It allowed us to identify whale shark migration patterns and movement patterns so we could change where ship strikes were happening and to actually protect these species. We took that model, WildMe took that model, and these are the intelligent agents that were scrubbing the YouTube videos, but we took that model to create WildMe, and they now are looking across 217 species, following something like 268,000 individual animals around the world, supporting 2,000 conservation organizations, researchers, scientists around what we're doing across land and ocean, across species, and processing lots of these encounters. And these are open source platforms for people to be able to tap into. And the number of different platforms are devoted to different things. And I was thinking as we were sitting here that having a wild book for wildlife disease could be a really powerful tool that could help accelerate the community using it. What I think is really interesting about what we are doing with the conservation AI is the leap we've made in the AI technology. We started Sentinel to identify species and started moving to identifying individuals. And if you identify, Sentinel was the hardware-based solution, right? And so it's a hardware, software-based solution. The key of understanding individuals is you understand whether a conservation impact, a corporate move to deforest a forest, what impact it has on that population. WildMe is only focused on that demographic change. And it's really powerful in terms of how it uses that demographic change. But what has been really interesting, is that we now have developed models that automatically detect new species. It doesn't know what's the name of that species, but it can then count individuals without training. And that's kind of that, because of all the data across all the species, the system has now moved to learn faster and faster, allowing us to greatly increase the speed of intake of species that we can start to cover. And that's really critical as we think about how do we actually assess what is the endangered state of these species. These guys are working globally and around the world with a lot of different partners, and it's a small team. One of the other uses is, if you think about it, a lot of wildlife surveys have happened where you are sitting in a plane, you've got two observers to either side, and you're trying to count the elephants in this forest. You guys all see them, right? It's kind of hard. You have to be trained, you have to have the search image, it takes a lot of time and experience, and it's easy to be able to miss where they are. The opposite case is that you're going over and you're trying to count caribou. And all those little dots in the image are caribou. And the ability for an observer to do that is subject to a substantial bias. So we've automated this project through something called Scout to allow us to use aerial surveys and AI for wildlife counts within what we're doing. We've also been looking at how we count, and this is a project we've just started. It's a heartbreaking project because we're working with the National Forest Service, the National Park Service, the U.S. Forest Service, National Park Service, Indigenous Properties. Those first two institutions have really been decimated. So we think this is so much of a more important project. Sequoias are the biggest, largest trees, I think in the world, but definitely within the United States. They're an extraordinary symbol of U.S. biodiversity and U.S. identity, in my opinion. But because of the intersection of fire, climate change, and the bark beetle, which was historically part of this community, but now has shifted from something that was part of this ecology into a now threat to the sequoias, we need to be able to assess the health of sequoias and find solutions to addressing these problems. So this is the first time that we are actually ever counting the number of sequoias in the United States and then actually assessing their health using a combination of Airbus data that is being provided to us, planet data, other satellite data, drone data that we can put together to do this assessment and maintain the status of these trees across what we're trying to do. Projects that we're looking at right now, the red list is the endangered species list for the world and the state of endangerment of animals. So IUCN has been around for something like 60 years. During that time, the red list is their core product. They've been able to assess an incredible 169,400 species. They do it through these species survival commission groups that are focused on individual species groups, carnivores, bears, other ungulates. But the average assessment takes about 7 years to complete, and the collection of data. The IUCN's goals by 2030, which I think are laudable, are to increase this number from 169 to 269,000, as well as to reassess 142,000 of them because the data is really out of date. The threats have changed. The forest that a particular species lived in is gone, or a swamp has been drained. And it is inconceivable how they will actually be able to do this. We are discovering new species at the rate of 18,000 a year. And 14% of the analysis that they've done is a species is data deficient. And what that means is for that species, it is not protected. It is not put on any endangered species list. No protected areas are actually developed for it when we have that status. So it is really clear to me that they can't really be able to do this without AI. And there's another thing is this data deficiency issue actually is not a hard problem to solve because we deal with incomplete information all the time for national security, for intelligence, for weather, across a wide variety of areas we are used to dealing with for a lack of incomplete information. And so we need to think about how we put those things into new models. And so the thing we've proposed to the Red List is actually running a prize, the other half of our work around prizes and challenges and competitions around these 4 categories. LLMs to actually help summarize and utilize conservation data. And we'll be testing these against assessments that were previously done, so we have a sense of how it can compare to the human-driven groups, computer vision and acoustics that allow us to automate the process for assessing species diversity, risk modeling at scale, and then really thinking about a whole new series of tools that are available to them. And this is currently being decided on. IUCN is an organization, it's the World Conservation, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. It's made up of thousands of conservation organizations in about 100 countries. So they have to be very cautious in their approach. So this will be a big move for them if we're able to do this together. There's a lot of challenges within this conservation AI space. There is way too much fragmentation. There's lots of little research projects, but for conservation to be successful, as well as for disease monitoring, disease tracking, treatment, we need to do this stuff at scale. There are way too many pilots and far too fewer funders to actually help bring these solutions to scale. We are very lucky to work very closely with Meta's AI group, Microsoft AI for Good, Google's AI group, and Amazon, which all support our research and serve as a source of collaboration. We don't work with Apple, but I like Apple products, so they're on there anyway. They count as big tech too. Big tech, though, I do not think will solve these problems by themselves. We need conservation. They have their own constraints and their own interests, and we need conservation organizations and the next generation of conservation organizations, whatever they look like. I think the existing generation will probably be legacy industries that'll either evolve or die. And thinking about what the future organization looks like looks very different. And the best conservation organizations in the future may be corporations. It may be new models. It is unclear as we look to the future for what has been successful. What is really clear is what is working, what has been done now have prevented things from getting worse, but has not stopped us from moving to the sixth extinction. Standardization is really important for AI. One of the reasons LLMs have accelerated so quickly was people set up open benchmarks that people could test their models against. So you had an idea of how well you're doing. We need for conservation, like you need for veterinary science, foundational data sets that are open and available for everyone. And we're working with the Smithsonian to provide these two things to the larger conservation community, because just as they have been storing skulls and skins and molecular samples and plants, that they should be storing this type of data and making it available as a research. The issues I told you about standardizing how camera traps are set up actually has a huge impact on your accuracy. And this is one of the key things that we need to do to reduce the risks that we talked about. Interoperability of these systems is really important. And when I was chief scientist at USAID, we had so many med tech devices in Uganda that the Ugandan that did not communicate with each other, that the Ugandan government got exasperated and banned them all. Put a moratorium until the community could actually agree on interoperability. You need testing and validation protocols. You need data access policies and data ownership policies. And I learned something really interesting about just the hunger for such data by the large companies. A good friend of mine worked for BBC and Discovery, Natural History Film, and told me that so much of their filming that they're doing, right, so much of their revenue now not just comes from the distribution of whatever film is made for, that has Attenborough in it, but it is all the shots of the animals are sold to AI companies to ingest in their models. The data is actually one of the most important things, and this is why it needs to be open and transparent in terms of what we're doing. We need a consumer report type function for AI technologies in conservation, because there's a lot of people claiming things that perhaps they can't do, what we call vaporware. And this is really, really important because species are being determined, management plans are being determined on this. At the same thing, we can't wait for perfection because we don't have enough time, money, or efficacy to be able to do this. And we need to have intermediary organizations that can help with the testing, with the evaluation, with holding these databases as we're talking about. We see for conservation, wildlife population estimates largely based on non-invasive AI techniques, intelligent agents that can collect and curate big data for wildlife with largely unsupervised AI. And also with this is the integration of all the other data that's out there, right? Every year that we are living, we're producing more data than has been produced previously in all of human history. It's doubling every year. All those sensors, all those devices, even the self-driving cars are contributing to the data sets that are out there. How do we actually use all that satellite imagery, all this knowledge, all the ability that we have to understand human impact and human behavior and tie it with animals? Because for far too long, conservation hasn't had a human as part of the ecosystem. And they're clearly the driver that we need to think about. Our economic models, right now in the Amazon, it is being cleared in this massive process. So a place called La Pampa, I wish I could show you a picture of it, is a place where 15,000 hectares were cleared in 3 years in one of the most important sections of the Amazon, in the Andes Amazon complex, by gold miners who have stripped the land bare and turned it into 1/3 ponds that are contaminated by mercury to get gold. And that process, number one source of mercury emissions in the world, which is bioaccumulated. It changes the ability, if we think about disease, for animals in terms of their susceptibility to infection. It increases the stress on animals, and vectors, which increases shedding rates. So as veterinary scientists, we need to sort of work together with the conservation sector, and this is what Steve Osofsky's group does exceedingly well, to really think about the whole picture of what we're trying to do. But this process of understanding what's happening with gold, the price of gold is going up because of the uncertainty in the United States, because of the wars in Ukraine and in other parts of the world. That uncertainty increases the number of people who go in and clear the Amazon, which has an impact on disease spillover and on conservation within what we're doing. So putting together those data sets and doing these types of analyses give us a way of understanding what's going to happen in conservation and being able to redirect our resources in a way to be able to address them. We can have wildlife researchers focused on analysis and protection and not what most of our effort has been going to, which is monitoring. And we can ensure everyone, by democratizing this data, every country has the ability to do this. Ultimately, I think there's a full technology stack that we will see from drones to ubiquitous satellite infrastructure. There's a new set of constellation of satellites that's going up that's just managing fire around the world. And we've seen this we think about the devastating impacts in LA and fires, but the fires in the Amazon are another one that we need to address. eDNA, AI technology, habitat changes, all of these things give us acoustics, give us the ability to help protect species in a way we couldn't before. But we need to think about what are the tools and what are the systems that give us the ability to scale these things up. Because what we've been doing so far is insufficient, but there's hope in the future. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for that. That was brilliant. We'll take any questions online. Alex. Yes, Petra back there. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for that talk. Excellent topic. I'm just wondering if you're saying you're having conversations with a lot of the big tech companies and they're supporting the work that you do, which is amazing. Are you having conversations about the environmental cost of the AI itself? And are there any conversations as to how they are working on minimizing it?
We have not had those conversations with them. We're just, we're a really small organization that we're just happy to be able to actually work together with them. The biggest thing, the hardest thing for us is we negotiate, when we are talking to them, we are bringing also our data sets together to share. And putting controls on how those data sets are used is really hard when, I'm also a lawyer in addition to being an evolutionary biologist. So I act, because we're small, I also wash the dishes in our office, but we're really small. Like negotiating with a law firm or a team of lawyers, there is a power asymmetry there that's really hard. So right now, we've got people in those organizations within their AI for good that are willing to work with us and willing to do it. They are working, they do all, like Microsoft had Lucas Joppa, who was an extraordinary leader, came out of Microsoft Research, who was their first environmental officer, who has really put them on that trajectory toward greater sustainability. They all have those efforts underway. But for us, we've been just focused on particularly protecting our users and the rights of people that may not be able to defend themselves either.
Yes, go ahead.
Thanks so much for your talk. I honestly feel a lot better about the world after listening to your talks.
So I didn't depress you, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was depressed at the beginning, much better now. But I'm a clinician by training, so that's the lens I kind of sat here listening to your talk. And I was really curious, especially with the neurologic gates that you see in the cats, big cats. Has there been any talk about transfer learning and looking at other species, and obviously being a small animal clinician, simply taking that model and transitioning that not only to other bigger species, but cats in use at home for owners and things like that?
We are 100% excited to do so. Like, I have this crazy vision because all these hunters have camera traps out there, right? And an opt-in system that allows people to determine if there's chronic wasting showing up on their systems, right? And what is the risk to them if they eat the meat? I don't know. Prions scare me. Like I don't want anything to, if you can't autoclave it, I don't want it near me. But yes, I think we can apply it to gait problems across a wide variety of species, lameness, all of those things, mange. These are all things that 100% I think we are able to do. And I think one of the things we want to do is create the platforms that allow other people to do it and open this up for conservation like we've done in other sectors.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Just a quick question on, I love the idea of the open data, but of course I worry. You talk about other people who might misuse. Oh, look there is a jaguar right there, right now. So thinking about like how we protect the animals even while sharing and collecting the data. And then we've had conversations, I'm very interested in all these topics, but about the effect of drones or other things on those populations as well. So how you kind of deal with, yes, getting the data is really important, but getting the data disrupts the birds or disrupts things by the noise and we've seen raptors take down drones because they don't like them. So we know that they interact with those devices as well, so.
Yeah, on the camera traps themselves, one of the things we're looking at is an all-in-one device that's very low cost, but also indistinguishable from the environment. Your main limitation is power. And, so you've got to think about how you set up a system and that is accessible to people, that has power constraints. everything in the forest, in a rainforest fails, is the one thing I know for sure, right? And everything that you put into the ocean fails at some point. So those are some of the constraints that we have, and we are thinking about there. On drones, what's really interesting, and I'm not working on this now, but we're seeing this, is new drones that essentially can sit above a landscape for days to weeks to months and are just up there without making they're much quieter, that have much more the ability to do it, right? Everything in consumer electronics that is developed helps us with what we're doing in conservation. What was really cool with Planet, when they started, I worked with the Planet folks when they were at NASA. They were my counterparts when I was at USAID. So I got to be in on the, what they did is, if you think about Landsat, and there's great value in Landsat, but when you build a piece of space technology, the technology that goes in the space is usually 10 to 20 years old because it has to be space certified, it has to work. And so that cost us $1 billion to build and launch. It gives us 30-meter resolution, 15 panchromatic, everywhere, every 2 weeks, 7 bands, great product, right? And Planet said if we build these nanosatellites, right, and using consumer technology, we can actually build them for something like $40,000. That's what it cost when they started. $17K to launch, because they're just incredibly light. They use a lot of different, they don't have propulsion. They have really nifty ways of actually doing that. But you ring the planet with them. As the planet turns, you have 3-meter resolution everywhere, every day. And that gives us capabilities we've never had before. And it's all because they weren't using bespoke technology, but they were leveraging the consumer revolution in technology, which has huge problems, in terms of critical minerals, in terms of demand, and recycling and circular systems and all of that. I totally acknowledge it. But it is a different way to think about, the changes that we are seeing are happening so fast that the problem is if we choose not to actually avail ourselves of the systems that are happening. Because it is really clear, we have this concept that was created at the Rio Declaration of the precautionary principle. But we know we're 5 to 17 years away from the Amazon tipping. We know that it's going to be 9.6 billion people on this planet by 2050, or if not sooner, and that's going to be 70% more food. And getting that food is about 1 billion hectares of new land that has to be cleared. That's the United States is 950 million hectares. That's the US and that's the Amazon and the Congo Basin that'll be cleared. So we definitely need to be able to we can't wait for every perfection, but we've got to be able to harness the tools that are available to us to be able to use. But yeah, even regular camera traps, jaguars sometimes walk around them because they know they're there. So you've got to think about animal behavior, and each animal has different behavior, so it has different perception.
So just getting back to that point about the potential nefarious uses of having all this data available. What are
Well, scrub the location data first, right? And so iNaturalist does that. You can't get that. You can get access to their data, but they're going to take away the location data in being able to do that. I think, for some species, it's a real risk, right? But we're in evolutionary biology. There's the concept of a Red Queen hypothesis, which means it was a guy named Lee Van Valen from the University of Chicago that said species, but it also works for diseases and species, are running as fast as possible to stay in the same place, right? Predator, prey, disease, whatever. That is this. I feel the same thing is true with the poachers and everything else. They are using all the tools. So why shouldn't we?
Questioner?
Putting yourself in the shoes of in a lab in AI and conservation, what does this defragmentation look like? How would you engage with it?
Yeah, so one of the things is putting products into trusted institutions that are available for everyone. So I think that is like an institution like the Smithsonian, or just like the ornithology lab is with acoustics, right? That supports a larger community in being able to do it. For us, it's we're an NGO, but we've been trying to merge with as many other organizations as possible. We've just completed 2 mergers. WildMe was one. There's another one where we brought on a guy named Eric Dienerstein, who's the former chief scientist at WWF and has also built really incredible products in Edge AI. And what we want to do is bring those people together and create the space for them to be able to move faster, and where you've got a single organization that is, filing taxes and covering insurance, but you also have the number of people that work together. At the end of the day, I'm not trying to build a WWF or a TNC or one of these organizations. I would like to be part of a larger network. But this particular field of conservation technology is dying because no one can move from those pilots. And I think that's a really limiting factor. So we're trying to, what we call it, WildMe still maintains their branding, right? We just call it lab, Conservation X Labs, because we see it as a lab within what we're doing. That is a space for people to do extraordinary things, much like the spaces in this building.
Yes.
So one of the consistent challenges across many industries is data sharing, where data is available. And so how do we kind of create this sort of mindset shift to where we have people kind of realize the value of data? Because before we can get to a point where we can start thinking about standardization and interoperability, people have to come together and be like, okay, we have this data that can solve some of the complex challenges that we're facing. And so how do we get to that point?
Yeah, again, I think this is, the US government actually has massive amounts of biodiversity data. And so, but it hasn't been opened or shared equally or fairly in a way that is accessible. And that's what, I'm working with the Smithsonian Undersecretary for Science, Ellen Stoffen, who really understands tech because she used to be chief scientist at NASA. So she gets it, and we're trying to create these data collections that are accessible, not unlike, I forgot the name of the acronym, but the Central Suppository for Genetics Data that we have for genetic sequences across species, or the barcode of life that University of Guelph has, or other things like that. And I think having a neutral site is really important. But the other thing is, individual researchers have very little, they don't release their data. Their camera trap data is, right? There's lots of individual conservation organizations don't do it. So clearly, we need to change those incentives for people to be able to do so. And part of it is getting the philanthropic organizations that fund these organizations to ask that it be open and transparent, much as like what we hope will happen or is happening with scientific publications, so that they're not behind paywalls. Same deal.
Yes, go ahead.
Hey, do you still see a place for citizen science in some of the analysis of these population counts? Because I know historically we used to do things like join on Zooniverse and actually look photo by photo and count the number of zebras on it. Now citizen science is being used to train AI that does the same thing. Do you still think there's still a place for participation in this on a broad level?
I mean, whaleshark.org, which is the very first thing WildMe did, still has citizen scientists. They're not pure citizens. They're like dive masters or they're research leaders, which is in some ways, it's like they already have a level of some expertise, but they're not within the research or conservation network. They're an important source of contributions to this. On iNaturalist, right, you have citizen scientists and you have that are scientists that are like really great experts but they're not part of iNaturalist, but they're part of the community that's helping with the identification and training the AI as a result of it. We have a lot of species in the world, and most of them we really don't know anything about, right? If we're talking about 10 to 20 million species, and the IUCN has assessed 164,000 for endangerment, we have a problem. And this is one of those areas where I think in conservation, AI needs to be part of it. But I love citizen science, so I'm a huge fan of it. I do bio blitzes all the time, so.
Yes, go ahead. Oh, sorry, we'll get you, since you haven't asked a question yet, if that's okay. Go ahead.
Sorry, me again. Just piggybacking on Parminder's question. Oh, sorry, were you going? I apologize. You sure? No, you go ahead. Sorry, I thought he pointed to
So
me.
Canadian.
You're very polite here at Cornell, that's what.
Since you mentioned that the Conservation X Labs collects a lot of species distribution and bird migration data, and it's specifically trained for conservation, I was wondering if any of the environmental data or the behavioral data could be adapted for host and vector path data, and was it ever used to map or predict zoonotic spillover, and what did it look like?
This is like my dream. Like I would love to, I mean, anything that has so you could think about what's a correlate with something that has a phenotypic signature and train for that correlate and see how it goes. I didn't talk about it, but we have a handheld, our other area of hardware is molecular science, and we have a handheld molecular platform that's ruggedized for the last mile. It's built for a 6-year-old to use it. My 6-year-old ran a test on it. He's not that smart. And I'm joking, he's very smart. But it is we built that, and it now does like eDNA analysis, which is the latest functionality. We would love to bring those two things together and thinking about it. For instance, right now in the middle of Congo, there is a bat cave which they suspect is an important source for a number of diseases. There's obviously an Mpox outbreak. And the thing that you want to actually kind of understand where you could actually use something like this is set up camera traps and automate the detection of what's going in and out of that cave that's feeding on the bats that fall to the ground. And then assess those animals as to what additional vectors are out there, right? And how is that spillover happening? But the ability to think about these other things, like you have Raina Plowright here, who's incredible and has come up with these ideas of landscape immunity, which I think, right, this true intersection, I mean, you have a very famous Steve Osofsky here, but you have, right, this, idea of like, our misuse of nature is accelerating the opportunities for emergence and mutation of disease. How do we bring those two elements together, as you're suggesting? I'm love to work with Cornell and with Steve's center here to be able to do that. It's a dream.
Yeah, go ahead. We'll have one more question. Yeah.
So now I'll piggyback on Parm's question, but I guess my question more relates to how you guys are thinking about that safety of the data. And even if you're scraping away metadata, like there's a paper in JAMA that came out on the human side with radiological data. And even when so many filters were passed through the radiological images, race was still detectable even when the metadata was scraped. So when you're talking about computer vision, you're talking about looking at any of these jaguars and caves and things like that, like there's the potential that somehow location is going to be picked up. So are you looking at the organizations that are using your data open source, and is there like a validity or process that they need to go through, or how are you guys thinking about that?
Yeah, we have kind of three things. I think on the WildMe platform, the data belongs to the users, and they're the ones using the platform. So the data is not open to the rest of the community, and that is really important. We do vet just like on a very gentle basis. With the Sentinel device, we vet much more strongly, and we have the ability to turn off those devices remotely. Because we have the ability to update models over the air, like a Tesla, we have the ability to turn them off anywhere in the world. We're not monitoring, but if we get evidence of something happening that seems suspicious, then that becomes an issue, right, for that. And then we've made very clear decisions not to sell to certain countries, just based on potential risks of misuse of the technology themselves. We've even chosen, and I don't know how effective it is. Like one of the things we realized is we could build air-based, essentially the equivalent of eDNA in water, DNA collectors. right? So the idea is most of the uses for a molecular tool has been wildlife trafficking, timber trafficking, supply chain verification, fish traceability. If you get red snapper in the United States, 88 to 92% chance unlikely to be red snapper. And 86% of the chance likely to come from a less well-managed fishery and probably something that'll make you sick. So just don't order the red snapper. This is our experience. With that tool, one of the things we wanted to do was have a sniffer for containers to see if there were any endangered wildlife or trafficked wildlife products in there, right? And so you could imagine like pushing, opening up a vent in a cargo container, pushing air in and sniffing what comes out, and then being able to pick that up with a handheld tool and do that assessment within 30 minutes of what's in there. That is the value of this, right? And it's as accurate as best-in-class PCR. But we chose not to because we could imagine all these scenarios for misuse. Fact is, people are now developing that technology. So the question of whether us choosing not to meant anything for us to do so. And these are all great questions and hard decisions. And I was just thinking that based on the last talks, we should probably have a governance council within our organization, not unlike the animal care and use committees that you have that we are using, and maybe we're asking other people to do so in the terms of use and access that we give, the licenses that we give. Great question.
Great. Well, I want to thank you once again for a thought-provoking and brilliant talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, next up, we have an hour break for lunch, kindly sponsored by Zoetis. So it'll just be right up the stairs. So we'll see you in an hour.
My farm. Nice. And it's always amazing to me that